The Texas heat hung thick over Miller's ranch like a suffocating blanket. Dust devils swirled across the dried pasture as Everett Miller stood at the fence, his weathered hands gripping the wooden rail. In the center of the enclosed arena, a massive chestnut stallion named Storm reared violently, his muscular frame glistening with sweat and rage. "He's thrown 3 professional trainers this month alone," Everett muttered, his voice heavy with frustration. The old rancher had spent 40 years breaking wild horses, but Storm was different. This wasn't simple wildness, it was pure, calculated aggression. Landon Hayes, the most expensive horse trainer in the region, had left just that morning. His arm was wrapped in gauze, and his pride was even more bruised. "That animal is dangerous," he'd said. "Some horses can't be trained, some need to be put down." But Everett refused to believe that. Storm had been wild-caught 2 months ago from a remote part of the Mustang Range. The stallion bore scars, deep, jagged marks along his ribs that suggested he'd fought for survival against predators and rivals. His dark eyes held intelligence and memory, not just instinct. Everett's granddaughter Hadley watched from the barn doorway, her lean frame outlined against the shadowed interior. At 16, she'd spent half her childhood on this ranch, learning to read horses before she learned to read books. She watched Storm pace, watching the stallion's movements with a focus that belied her youth. "Grandfather, he's not angry," she said quietly, approaching the fence. "He's scared." Everett glanced at her, then back at the horse. Most people saw only the violence, but Hadley saw something else. The way Storm's ears constantly rotated, tracking every sound. The way his nostrils flared at unfamiliar scents. The stallion wasn't attacking because he wanted to dominate. He was attacking because he was terrified. 3 days later, Everett's grandson pulled into the ranch driveway in a battered pickup truck that had seen better decades. Landon Miller was 19, recently returned from his first year of college in Austin. He dropped out without explanation, much to his parents' disappointment, and announced he was staying with grandfather until he figured things out. Landon was quiet, the kind of quiet that made people uncomfortable. He worked the ranch without complaint, fixing fences and moving hay bales with a methodical patience that reminded Everett of his late wife. The boy rarely spoke unless spoken to, and his eyes held the haunted quality of someone carrying secrets. That evening, as the sun painted the Texas sky in shades of orange and purple, Landon was mending a section of fence near the main arena when he noticed Storm. The stallion had calmed slightly, though his ears remained alert, constantly pivoting toward danger. Hadley appeared beside Landon, wiping her hands on her jeans. "Grandfather's ready to sell him to a ranch in Oklahoma," she said. "They said they'd give him another month of training, but everybody knows what that really means. Old horses that don't break go to slaughter." Landon didn't respond immediately. He watched the horse with an intensity that matched Hadley's own focus. There was something about the way the stallion moved, controlled even in distress, dignified even in confinement. "Why?" Landon asked finally, his voice rough from days of silence. "Why what? Why is your grandfather trying so hard to keep him?" Hadley smiled sadly. "Because he doesn't believe anything is truly broken beyond repair." The next morning, Landon woke before dawn. He dressed in silence and moved through the house without waking anyone. In the barn, he prepared a bucket of oats mixed with crushed apples, simple, no tricks or sedatives like other trainers had tried. He approached Storm's enclosure slowly, making no sudden movements. The stallion's head snapped toward him immediately, muscles tensing, preparing for violence. But Landon didn't enter the arena. Instead, he set the bucket at the fence line and stepped back, giving the horse distance. "I don't know what happened to you out there," Landon said quietly, his voice steady and low. "But I know what it feels like to be broken, to feel like nobody understands, to think maybe ending is better than continuing." Storm's ears pointed toward him. The stallion didn't approach the food yet, but he was listening. Landon talked for 20 minutes, not about horse training or breaking will, but about college and his own failures, his parents' disappointment, the feeling of being utterly alone in a crowded room. He talked about his depression and the bottle of pills sitting in his truck right now that represented his own moment of choice. Hadley found him there, tears streaming down his weathered young face, and she understood. This wasn't about training a horse. This was about a broken boy trying to save a broken animal by acknowledging the brokenness in himself. Over the next week, Landon returned every morning and evening. He never forced contact. He simply sat 30 feet from Storm's enclosure and existed quietly, sometimes talking, often silent. He brought different foods, sweet grass, hay, carrots, watermelon rinds. He never raised his voice. He never moved with aggression. On the 8th day, Storm approached the fence. The stallion's massive head extended toward Landon, nostrils flaring to catch his scent. His dark eyes, which had held only rage before, now reflected something different: curiosity and cautious hope. Hadley watched from her hiding spot in the barn loft, recording every second. She could feel something shifting, not just in the horse, but in her cousin. The weight was lifting from his shoulders. 2 weeks into Landon's routine, he was finally allowed inside Storm's enclosure, with Everett standing guard at the gate. The stallion could have killed him, could have crushed him beneath his hooves, or thrown him into the fence with the force that had injured the professional trainers. Instead, Storm approached Landon and lowered his massive head. Landon placed his hand slowly against the stallion's neck, and the connection was electric, not magical, not supernatural, but deeply, profoundly real. Two traumatized beings recognizing each other's wounds. "How did you do this?" Everett asked, his voice thick with emotion as he watched his grandson begin the gentle process of introduction to saddle and bridle. Not through dominance or pain, but through trust and understanding. "I stopped trying to break him," Landon replied. "I just listened to what he needed." Over the following month, the transformation was remarkable. Storm, who had been destined for slaughter, became a calm, responsive partner. Landon would ride him across the ranch property, not as a conqueror, but as a companion. The stallion's movements became fluid and willing, his temperament gentle despite his size and power. The story spread through the ranching community. Professional trainers requested to learn Landon's methods. Everett offered him a full-time position, tears in his eyes as he watched his grandson work with other wild-caught horses using the same patient, compassionate approach. But for Landon, it was deeper than a job offer or regional reputation. It was proof that broken things could be healed, that damaged souls, whether human or animal, could be restored through patience, understanding, and the radical choice to see pain instead of just aggression. 3 months after Landon's arrival, Dr. Ember Richardson, a veterinary behaviorist from Austin, came to the ranch after hearing about the impossible transformation. She watched Landon work with Storm and 2 other previously aggressive horses, and she was amazed. "This isn't luck," she told Everett. "This is psychology. This is understanding trauma and responding with healing instead of punishment. Universities teach this as theory. Landon is doing it as practice." She offered him something unexpected, a scholarship to study equine psychology with a focus on trauma recovery and behavioral rehabilitation. Not just for horses, but potentially for therapeutic programs working with both humans and animals. Hadley saw her cousin change before her eyes. The haunted quality diminished. The weight lifted. The pills in his truck were discarded, not in desperation, but in hope. On the last evening before Landon left to start classes, he stood with Storm in the pasture. The stallion, once a murderous beast that every trainer had failed to break, rested his head on Landon's shoulder. They stood together as the Texas sun descended, painting everything in gold and crimson. "You saved me," Landon whispered to the horse. "You showed me that broken isn't permanent." Everett watched from the fence line, understanding that his grandson had found his purpose. It wasn't about dominating animals, it was about understanding them. It wasn't about proving strength, it was about recognizing strength in vulnerability and compassion. Skylar, Everett's neighbor from the adjacent ranch, shook his head in amazement. "I still can't believe that wild animal is the same horse that tried to kill Landon Hayes 3 months ago." Everett smiled, watching his grandson and the stallion together in the fading light. "Neither of them are the same," he said. "That's the whole point. Sometimes the most powerful transformation happens when someone finally sees you, not for what you've done, but for what you've survived." Storm whinnied softly, a sound of contentment, not rage, and Landon's hand remained steady on the stallion's neck, 2 broken souls forever bound by the moment they chose to heal instead of destroy.